Welcome to today's presentation, Integrating Chef with ServiceNow, Improve Velocity with Automation Insights. Let's go ahead and get started. Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Aaron. All righty. And before we dive in, as Aaron mentioned, I'm Nick Rycar, a Technical Product Marketing Manager here at Chef, and I'm joined today by...
I'm Brittany Woods, and I am an automation engineer over at CARFAX.
Thanks, Brittany. So quick overview of what we're going to be diving into today. I'm going to kick things off with a high-level overview of Chef automation as a whole, and in particular, what Chef is and what it isn't, and indeed seeing where there's opportunity for a tool like ServiceNow and Chef to be better together. And that's our next session. So we'll take a look at what the integrations between Chef Automate and ServiceNow look like, including our existing incident management system and our forthcoming CMDB data feed integration. Then Brittany and I will chat a little bit with some stories from the real world. We'll take a look at how CARFAX is using Chef and ServiceNow to drive their automation efforts. And we'll kick things off at the end with, or we'll wrap things up, indeed, with a demonstration and look at the ServiceNow dashboard and what some live data looks like going into that. So to move things right along, a quick look at Chef automation, what it is and what it isn't. So Chef's solutions are bundled together in what's called the Enterprise Automation Stack. Everything you need to automate everything you manage. The chief automation engines right there in the middle are Chef Infra, which handles our system configurations, Chef Inspec, which handles automation of security and compliance scans and auditing, and Chef Habitat, which automates our application definition and dependency management. We also provide Chef Workstation as a single installable executable that you can use to get all the tools you need to create, test, and use those automation engines. And finally, we have Chef Automate, which gives you observability into all of the data that this automation generates. And it's that data that we're going to spend the majority of our time looking at today, because that data is important and getting more important over time. So right off the top, Chef Automate is a place that collects that data. Whenever you configure something, whenever you scan something, you're going to see the output of that in Chef Automate so that we can validate that our policy is being executed properly, that we can continuously audit all of our systems, be they on-prem, virtualized, or out in the cloud, and give us both the real-time status and historical insights into our automation efforts over time. And this is getting more and more important. There was an interesting bit of research that Forrester did last year where they talk about what they call the automation paradox. And what they were finding was at organizations who were getting more and more mature with their automation, they were actually seeing an increase in their MTTR, their mean time to recovery. Now, MTTR is not be-all, end-all. If I have fewer incidents, but they're lasting longer, that might still be a net win. But when they were trying to dive into why that might be, part of it came down to what you might expect. Our environments are getting more complex. Individual compute, networking, storage resources are getting both shorter lived and greater in number. So we've got a lot more data to look at and a whole lot more places things can fail. But what they were also seeing was that knowledge was also getting shorter lived. And it made sense when you start thinking about it. Those menial tasks that became motor memory, certainly to me when I was a sysadmin, have now been automated away. And I don't know exactly what that fix is when I do get an issue. So we're seeing fewer day-to-day issues come in, but those issues that come in are both more challenging and have less existing resources available for folks to troubleshoot. So it becomes really important to know exactly how those systems are being managed, and when you're using automation solutions like Chef, how that automation is being executed, and is it being executed successfully. Now, Chef Automate is not an IT service management tool. So while it provides a ton of data that's valuable to a lot of stakeholders, Chef Automate tends to be a fairly specific tool used by folks that are handling the day-to-day operations, development, and security of those environments. But the data ends up being useful to a lot more than just the folks who are in Chef Automate all day. So the first question becomes, all this data that Chef Automate collects, is it available to all the people that need it? Can that data inform our incident management so that if we are seeing issues in Automate, we're tracking it and ticketing and what have you? Can Chef assist in populating our configuration management database, our CMDBs, especially as things are getting spun up and down in the cloud or inside of new container infrastructure like Kubernetes? I want to make sure that I have an accurate view of what's running. And the good news is the answer to that question can be yes across the board if we're using that data smart and getting it into our ServiceNow dashboard. So making sure our automation data is everywhere we need it to be. About a year and a half ago, we launched our first ServiceNow certified application with our incident application. This allowed automated incident generation from Chef Infra client failures and Chef Inspect audit failures. What is coming right around the corner, and it is in closed beta right now, is our CMDB data feed application. So a lot of the other data that gets collected by Chef, some system details, things like your host name, memory, CPU, installed software, etc., all gets collected during a Chef Infra client run, and now that data can be used to populate ServiceNow CMDB. And that also includes all the Chef Infra cookbooks that are being executed against your systems and the runs that have been run on those systems. Same true of the inspect profiles that are being used to assess our systems and the audits that have been run historically, whether they've succeeded or failed. So we'll be taking a look at both of those in just a bit. But first, I'd like to spend some time talking to Brittany. The beautiful thing about my world is I spend most of my day building demos, and I don't have a quote-unquote production to worry about. At least mine looks very different than most of the ones I've encountered in the wild. So really interested in learning how Chef has been doing in the real world. So hello, Brittany. Thanks for joining us.
Hi.
How long have you been using Chef at CARFAX?
Sorry, you cut out.
Oh, sorry about that. To kick things off, how long have you been using Chef at CARFAX?
We've actually been using Chef for the entire duration that I've been there. Chef was pretty new when I was brought on board, almost rolling up on 4 years ago. We have been using it. It was kind of a slow progression in the beginning. We started off with our Linux systems, and now we're starting to focus on our Windows systems. And the initial build out took about a solid year, maybe year and a half.
Wow. Right on. And what's been sort of the impact of getting that sort of automation process rolling?
So the major impact on our Linux systems is that they're now configured in a like way. We've shifted from doing individual changes on individual systems and more to that continuous management of the system. So everything is in code, everything is auditable, and we know exactly what we're getting when we log on to that Linux system, because you don't have people logging in and making changes. Those changes are within the cookbook themselves.
Gotcha. The old treat your servers like cattle and not pets.
Right.
Now, what has integrating Chef Automate with ServiceNow done for you? Has it changed the day-to-day for you and your colleagues?
So we were actually pretty early adopters in integrating the two pieces. We noticed early on that there was a need for not only managing our systems through Chef, but there was a need to understand the implications of the things that we were using to manage it. And that platform that gives us that insight is ServiceNow. So before there was an integration available, we looked at our systems and we realized that we had a lot of cookbooks that were continuously failing or randomly failing, but we didn't have very clear metrics on when that was happening. At the time, we had visibility before Automate was brought on, sure, but we still didn't really have that data over time. And then with the introduction of Automate, there was the notification engine. So we actually built a system that would allow us to understand not only where the failures were happening on what node, but correlate those together with the cookbooks that were failing. Because within CARFAX, our cookbooks are managed by the teams that actually understand what those cookbooks are doing. So our network engineers manage the network cookbooks, our system engineers manage the system engineering cookbooks like SSD and things like that. So those are really the people that can do something about that failure. Instead of sending them to a central repository, we send those incidents across to the team that can actually take action on that incident. And what we found was in doing that, we reduced our failure rate significantly, because now they weren't just going to a channel in Slack. Those failures that were happening, now they were being sent to the team that cared, and presented in a way that it wasn't overwhelming. So they were able to actually take action and get these failures under control. And so now we have a much lower failure rate, and we're able to kind of glean insight from that and understand that if our failure rate is 100 nodes are failing or 150 nodes are failing, there's an actual problem. Whereas if we see 5 to 15 on average, we know that that's pretty normal, and we can understand that there's not something happening in our environment.
No, that's a great point. It's that's, I think, the biggest thing I end up losing the forest for the trees in demo environments is the fire hose for me tends to be a pretty narrow stream. But once you start getting into larger estates, being able to sift that signal from noise and assign incidents out becomes more and more pressing, I imagine. Now,
absolutely. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But I did want to mention that our estate, we have around 4,000 nodes, just shy of actually. So we don't have a huge estate as far as node count, but what we do have is 700 CARFAX cookbooks approximately. And those, of course, have public dependencies. So our actual configuration and cookbook estate is pretty large.
Gotcha. Yeah. And that's, definitely, from my time in the trenches, all my time got spent just trying to figure out where in this, broad scheme of scripts and automation I had that break lived, and being able to do that correlation. I imagine something I would have liked to have back in the good old days. Now that you have that sort of data, a bit more accessible outside of kind of, core teams working on automation, has that helped you sort of branch out and sort of, get more folks interested in that process?
I would say yes and no. So the way all of our things are, development teams, as they begin messing with their systems and needing different things on their systems, they have to start using Chef as well. So we've kind of branched out that way as far as onboarding. But the insights that we didn't give an option, essentially. So all of these incidents and all of that insight data is automatic. So if you have a system and you're managing a cookbook, if that cookbook fails, you're going to get that incident, and you're going to start understanding the implication that may have.
Gotcha. And so I know that at CARFAX, y'all are one of the early adopters, helping us test out the new CMDB feature. What are you most excited about in being able to turn on that data feed?
So I think apart from being able to consistently feed data into our ServiceNow instance, because we have, you will have discovery if you're using ServiceNow and you're trying to populate your CMDB. But this gives us another avenue with which we can almost in real time, because it runs on that 30-minute interval, we'll be able to dump that data that Chef has about these systems that is up to date as of the time that it last ran. We'll be able to dump that information back into ServiceNow. So in theory, it would give us a more accurate CMDB, but also it'll allow us to start building those relationships between our systems, because our chef cookbooks give a lot of insight into what that server is or what that server does, as along with attributes and those things. So once we get that information back into ServiceNow, it saves us having to try and tie things together in a way that's not necessarily automatic or programmatic. We can start building out these relationships and understanding which systems matter to other systems. And so then you kind of get that whole picture where you can understand if this system breaks or the system goes down, well, that's going to impact these other 4 systems because here's where they're tied together.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's as a relative newbie to the ServiceNow dashboards, that's sort of been how I've been learning, is just like, let's keep clicking through this and see, you know, how these incidents and artifacts are interconnected. And it's been fun to see how I've gotten from, you know, my single alerts all the way into, all right, here's the code that was running on my audit, say. So what's next? What's coming down the road for CARFAX and Chef?
As I said before, we're very focused on our Windows systems at this point. We patch with Chef or with Chef and ServiceNow, depending on the system. So honing that process and gleaning more data from that. But then also we're starting to maybe look into more compliance avenues as well. So being able to feed that data back in automatically through the CMDB integration is also great, because then you can start to really, in that single pane of glass, glean information about the audit trail of your systems, really. What do my systems look like? Are they compliant? Do they have something that I thought was fixed that maybe isn't? So we're starting to look into ways that we can leverage compliance more and kind of glean those auditability aspects from our systems now that we've kind of standardized their configuration.
Excellent. And I think unless there's anything else I missed that you wanted to chat about, this might be a good time for it to segue into our demo.
I think we're all set.
All righty. And indeed, for our members out in the audience, feel free throughout to ask your questions in the Q&A widget down below. Once we're done with the demo, we'll go ahead and take some of your questions. And with that, let's go ahead and see if I can't share my screen out. All right. So what we're taking a look at here is my Chef Automate server. And right now I have a pretty small estate. Like I say, I have that luxury. I've only got 8 systems that I'm managing right now. We can see sort of how Chef Infra Client has been running. We can see my compliance status. Some nodes are compliant, but some nodes are not. Thankfully, though, I have set up some ServiceNow integrations, and indeed, the incident integration mentioned earlier is configured on my ServiceNow instance. So if we go into Chef Incidents and into Inspect Scans, I can see here that a couple of my systems, my SN Webinar 6 and 7 boxes, have been failing their audits for a minute. They're all tied into a single incident, so since this hasn't been resolved and it's all the same systems getting hit, we have a single incident that will aggregate the 128 inspect scans that have come back failed. I run them every 30 seconds, so not as bad as it could be, but still something I'm going to want to fix. We can go ahead into any of these individual audits and get a link back to the failure report in Chef Automate. So I can see exactly which controls failed and investigate the details of that failure. Now, because I like to keep things pretty quick in my systems, I've got some scripts set up that should go ahead and get things configured for me. Another nice thing about having this data is I can see that, well, in my client runs here, I don't see 6 or 7 in the list of machines. So this is a quick look at some of that new CMDB data. the information that you'll find in Chef Automate in the infrastructure tab. And indeed, it looks like 0 through 5 have done Chef Infra client runs, but those last two instances hadn't. So what I have here are a few different ways to see exactly why these audits are failing. I haven't actually applied my configuration policy. So went ahead and did that in the background while things are running. And we'll end up seeing, as things get refreshed, more nodes in the list. Of course, they need to finish running their Chef Infra client runs for that first run. But now we have that full complement of 8 servers, and should see our compliance reports start succeeding in short order. Again, they're running every 30 seconds, so we'll start seeing that soon. Once I confirm that is the case, I can go ahead and close out my incident, make any notes that I want, but I have that correlation now between an issue inside of my environment and a trackable incident in my ITSM tool that is ServiceNow. And indeed, voila, now all 8 nodes are passing their compliance scans. Their client runs are completing successfully. I can go ahead and close things out. Haven't had any failed client runs lately, thankfully, but of course we have all of our historical data here. So just as with our audit failures, when we see Chef Infra client runs fail, we can go ahead and take a look at the nature of that failure right in our ServiceNow dashboard. Either taking the link to our Chef Automate server to view it there, or we can see a little snippet of the error output right here in the dashboard. When it comes to the CMDB integration, this is where we can take all of the data collected by Chef's automation tools and put them to work for us. So what we're seeing here are all of the machines that have been set up in a few different environments. Here are my ServiceNow webinar systems. I'm only pulling this data every half hour, and 6 and 7 are new, so they're not going to be in the list just yet. But we can see for those systems I have pulled already what data we're pulling out of Chef Automate here. So I can see that they're running inside of my Amazon environment, and I can see what instance type they are, and I can get some information about the operating system running, memory, CPU. I can see the file systems that are mounted. I can see all the software and versions that are installed, and I can see what Chef's been doing. So here are all the Chef client runs that have happened on that machine since I've been tracking it here. When it comes to that information, we can see all the runs system by system. Here I'm just sorting by start time, so I can investigate those in detail. We can see which cookbooks are being run and on which nodes they're being run. So I have a hardening cookbook that's been run on my systems. I have some Windows security policies being run. You can also take a look at what those actual recipes look like. So what is OS hardening or DCA hardening going to look like? What runs have been run on and on which nodes? And I can see the full run list that was applied to that node and each individual recipe that got run. So I mentioned this is where I can sort of click through and find out all the information I need to know about what's been happening on my systems, as well as all the data that gets captured when Chef Client runs, so that it's not lost in translation. Back in Chef Automate here, again, we see that data available through this dashboard. So this gets pulled from what's called the node object. This is a big JSON hash of everything Chef knows about a system, including what configuration policy we've explicitly run, as well as some automatically pulled data, like that system profiling information and cloud data that gets pulled from a tool called OHI. So we have it available to us in that Chef Automate dashboard when we are doing our individual roles. And then we have that integration with ServiceNow to make sure that our asset database and our incident tracking system can be informed by and make use of that data so that it's being put to the best use. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share and see what questions we can answer for folks. So.
All right. Thanks, Nick. I will help filter through some of the questions here, and then can fight over who wants to answer.
You got it.
So we did get a lot of questions, so feel free to still submit some if you have any. First one we got here. How are you able to open a single SN ticket for a failed cookbook instead of having a new SN ticket open for the same problem? Example, you don't want a new ticket opened every time chef runs if there's a failure.
Gotcha. Yeah, and actually, yeah, in this case, in that demo environment, that was one of the learning points for me as well, because I had that same question. And it looks like until I actually go in and resolve it, each failed scan that came back ended up aggregating to the same incident. So it did give me the scan by scan details, but it didn't open a new incident for each. Has that been your experience out in the world, Brittany?
Yeah, so for us, what we do is a cookbook can be applied to, so we have some, I call them core cookbooks, that are applied to almost all of our nodes. So think 3,500 plus nodes. So you're not going to want 3,500 incidents whenever this cookbook fails. So what we do is we correlate on the cookbook itself as opposed to the node within ServiceNow. So if that cookbook fails, even if it fails on all of these nodes, on 3,500 nodes, you're only getting one incident, and then each alert or event that comes through is attached to that. So you can see it failed on all of these nodes within the incident itself, but you're only getting that one incident. It also, if you were to close that incident and then it fails again, it will open another incident.
Gotcha.
Oh, and one more thing. Sorry. We also have our cookbooks to be able to do that, to be able to correlate on that. We have our cookbooks in our CMDB as CIs. So we use those for the correlation point is the CI.
Gotcha.
There's been a couple comments just asking if this is a recording, and yes, it is. It'll be available by tomorrow, and there will also be slides that you can download. So that will be sent out in a follow-up email tomorrow. We also have a ton of other webinars on chef.io, so feel free to check that out. We run about 2 a month, so we have a ton that I'm sure you would want to watch as well. Next question here, are there specific ServiceNow modules required for integrating Chef into ServiceNow?
Gotcha. Yeah, I think the only requisite, so it should run on anything, I think, later than London, and it requires the system import sets package, but it's available in the App Store. So you can just go to store.servicenow. It's there as a certified app. It's called Chef Incident, I believe.
All right, great. Next one here. This might be in a reference to the demo. Someone was wondering, is this using Discovery or ServiceNow Integration Hub or a combination?
So in my case, the incident was installed directly from the store. So it's just making API calls out from Chef Automate. It essentially exposes, let me actually turn my screen share back on for a hot minute, because this one works well with a visual aid. If you wanted to take a look at what is configured here, so for example, when we were having my audit failures go in, installing the app will create an API endpoint. So as long as your Chef Automate server can hit your ServiceNow instance over port 443, you can go ahead and send those webhooks over. The data feed works in much the same way. The app is not yet available on the store. So if folks are interested in getting in on the closed beta, you can reach out to your account rep, or if you don't have one, reach out to our sales org and we can get you in touch. But we're hoping to have it published to the store in fairly short order. So, keep yourselves posted. Definitely check out the incident app. That's already readily available. And yeah, it'll work much the same way when the CMDB data feed is released.
All right, great. Next one here, what needs to be in place to integrate Chef with ServiceNow? What version of ServiceNow do you have to be on?
Yeah, so I think that's, like I said, London or later for the ServiceNow version. For Chef Automate, most of it's versioned by its build number. Anything past, I think it was October of 2018 or thereabouts when the initial release of the integration was out. So any relatively recent release of Chef Automate will support the ServiceNow integration.
A couple questions on OHI data. Does all of OHI data go into ServiceNow, or does ServiceNow just access OHI data as needed? And is all OHI data available for use in ServiceNow?
So that I am not 100% on. I know that, and I'm not sure what will or won't be configurable as the GA approaches. I believe what is currently there is a subset, but it does include sort of most of the direct high-level hash items in the OHI node object. But I don't have the full list. That's something I'll have to check on. And as of right now, it's doing it at a set interval. So I've got mine set to just send that data out as an aggregate every half hour.
All right, great. Let's see. We are getting a ton of questions, so just filtering through. Feel free to keep submitting questions if you have any. Next one, do incidents generated in ServiceNow through Chef have a detailed report of compliance issues, or do incident support groups need to access Chef Automate links every time to identify what the failures are and report back? This is for inspect scans.
Yeah, so I believe, and Brittany, correct me if I'm wrong here, in the incident app specifically, it will give you the link to Automate and the high-level details, so the numbers on how many individual controls failed. But I believe that was the entirety of it. With the CMDB integration, the granular control-by-control information is available.
Yep, I believe you're correct on that one.
Hey. Every now and then. Ooh, here's a fun one. Yeah, sorry to cut you off, Aaron. One for Brittany specifically. If you can share, what was the quickest fix done for a real-time failure on a node?
That is a number specifically that I don't have, but I do know. Allowed us to identify things that could be like potentially breaking. We do have, we call it a deploy lock in place. But basically what that does is, in conjunction with our Chef runs, we use the key value store in console, which keeps our failures. So if you have a given system for a particular, we'll call it TLA, because that's what we call it. But so if you have a single product that may or may not have like 5, 6, 7 nodes, only one of those nodes in a given site can run Chef at a time, which means that if it fails, the other 6 nodes are unable to run and converge, so it's not going to fail. So that kind of keeps us from having any kind of outages related to Chef. That's not always the case, but certainly it does keep us from harming ourselves. So in conjunction with that, the incidents have allowed us to say, oh, well, we just deployed this cookbook and now we have this incident saying it's failing. So it really brings it to the attention of the person doing the work much faster than previously, where we just had a Slack notification where all the failures dumped. So failures wouldn't be recognized sometimes for days. Just because there's so much going on. So it has improved it that way, but I can't give you an actual number because that's just something I don't have.
Right on. Yeah, it's like when you ask your comedian friends to tell you a joke. But yeah, no, that's great. I think like that's been a big part of my experience as well, that just being able to get those canaries in the coal mine easily and figure them out before I need to start tearing my hair out.
Yep, absolutely.
Another question here. How are the CIs getting into CMDB?
That mechanically, I don't know that I can speak to. As far as which assets are connected to each other, it does have sort of concepts of CI cookbooks in here. Sorry, I'm looking at properties in the background. But that may be something I need to look into, the under the hoods of the whatchamacallit, asset relationships. I am not entirely sure of.
Next question, can you also determine the priority of the tickets, or would that be analyzed by a person?
So I believe you can set a default priority for incidents that are generated by the incident system, but I don't know that there's any finer grained automated controls than that. Do you know offhand, Brittany?
So for what we were using specifically, within all of the ServiceNow scripting, we say whenever you get an incident or whenever you get an event of this type, create an incident with this priority. Because we didn't necessarily want to make it a paging incident, for example. And we also didn't want to set any given SLA on it either, saying you have to have this resolved within an hour, because it's for all cookbook failures, not just some. So obviously some of them are going to take research, especially if they're ongoing failures. So we set ours at an information priority, I believe, but you can, on ServiceNow's side, you can make it understand, hey, I see this kind of event coming through, make it this priority. And that's what ultimately determines the priority of the incident. You just pass it across.
Gotcha.
All right. Nick, are there any other ones here?
Yeah, I think there are a couple ones here that talk about the, relationship between discovery and the CMDB integration. And I believe that, I'm going to take a look now at my eyes. In addition to the integrator, what we need, it's just the configuration management package from ServiceNow that's required. So I don't know that discovery is directly interacting with this. But I think, and was that sort of the point you were making earlier, Brittany, about how sort of you can kind of deduplicate the data between them?
Yeah, yeah.
Gotcha. So, and then a couple folks had asked about the slide deck, and I believe, is that in the dashboard for folks, Erin?
It will be by the time the recording is available tomorrow.
Excellent. And then as far as support for the integration, again, at least for the one that is released, the incident one, it is a certified app on the store. I don't know offhand what that means SLA-wise, but whatever comes with being a certified app comes along with it. I believe updates will be coming from Chef, but they'll be released through that channel and go through the ServiceNow certification process. And one other question that came up is, does the benefit of Chef get lost being in a majority Windows environment? To which I would say no. We support Windows. We have sort of MSI install for Workstation and the client, and can sort of do pretty much all the tricks we do on Linux and Windows. We can bootstrap over DSC, or not DSC, over RDP. I'm losing my WinRM. My marketing three-letter acronym brain went into overload there. So yes, everything that you saw on my Linux nodes, you could get from a Windows node. We support compliance benchmarks for Windows Server as well as our flavors of Linux.
Just to add to that from a customer perspective, so I've been in a mostly Windows place before. Right now, CARFAX is 90%, I would say, Linux. But the crossover between the two operating systems is nice within Chef. Basically, it allows your Linux admins to understand Windows and your Windows admins to understand Linux because it brings a common language. But also the functionality is pretty straight across. So you won't really notice too big of a difference between writing for a 90% Linux environment versus a 90% Windows environment because they work together pretty seamlessly, and the Chef client itself is smart enough to kind of understand which direction you're going. So.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. A lot of like the resources are platform agnostic, and we'll use that auto data to figure out what to do. So if I, create a directory, as long as the path is a valid path, doesn't matter what my OS is, and unless I need to futz with registry keys or something that's super Windows specific, in which case there's resources for that. It'll look more or less the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
Up to and including PowerShell DSC, by the by. So if you are using some DSC scripts today, those are very easy to port into Chef recipes. And I think that covers the broad strokes here. Taking a quick look to see. Couple of questions about future development plans, which I'll get my foot in my mouth real quick if I try to speak to. So I don't have any specific information there outside of what's been presented today, but I'm sure we'll have more fun with ServiceNow in the future. And again, for a couple folks that had come in late, the webinar should be available on demand fairly quick for folks that have registered, and then we'll usually post it to our YouTube account a few weeks after that.
I do see a quick one. It was, what did the timeline look like to link ServiceNow and Chef? I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to answer this correctly, but for us, if you're speaking of like how long it took us to get the integration going and link together, that is like a day. Even if you do side scripting to try and make relationships and things like that, it does not take very long at all to set it up, especially with the incident integration itself. If you're not having to do anything specific, you basically flip a switch and allow it to connect. So it's not that big of a deal.
Can attest, as someone who has no idea what he's doing in ServiceNow, I was able to set it up without too much trouble. Right.
All right. Well, I think we will close it out there. Thank you, everybody, for all your questions. Definitely appreciate it. And I'm sure Nick and Brittany had fun answering some of the questions that you guys had. Like we mentioned a few times, this is recorded and we'll be sending out the on-demand probably by tomorrow. The slides will be available as well. And you can access it using the same audience link that you're using right now. Of course, we hope you found value in everything that was shared today, so feel free to share with people on your team or in your professional networks. And again, look out for an email that will have the on-demand recording and the slide deck. So with that, thanks everybody for attending. Thank you, Nick and Brittany, and happy birthday to Brittany. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day.